Okay. Well, thank you all for joining us today. We'll be presenting on processed foods, yay or nay. My name is Sarah. This is Anna. There's John. We are dietetic interns. All right, so we could start with a pre-survey. It should only take a couple minutes. Okay, seems like people are wrapping up. Move on. So before we can begin our discussion on processed foods and ultra processed foods, we kind of need to know where these labels are coming from. Ultra processed and processed come from the NOVA system. So this system was developed in 2009, and it was to categorize all food items according to the nature, extent, and purposes of the industrial processes they undergo. So just something important to note, NOVA system is about industrial processes, not necessarily about nutrient content. So the NOVA system is broken up into 4 groups. Group 1 has 2 parts, and that's minimally and unprocessed. So unprocessed are edible parts of plants and animals that are not altered after removal from the environment. And minimally processed are the food items where nothing has been added, but it can be cleaned or undergo other minimal processes, mainly for preservation. So those are things like drying, grinding, freezing, pasteurization. So example of this would be seeds, fruits, leaves, stems, roots, meat, milk, and eggs. Group 2 are culinary ingredients. So these are the food items that are made from and often eaten with Group 1 foods. So those are, think your spices like salt and sugar, it could be oils, butter, your honey, syrups, things like that. Group 3 are processed foods. So these are foods made from a combination between Group 1 and Group 2. So cooking would fall here. And food items would be cured meats, canned fishes, your canned veggies, fruits, freshly baked breads, fresh cheeses, etc. And Group 4 are your ultra processed foods. So these are foods made with non-home ingredients. They're ready to eat industrial foods. And this group often focuses on added chemicals, coloring, sugars, preservatives, enrichment, fortification. And a rule of thumb for ultra processed is that if the ingredients listed is 5 or more, then it often falls into the ultra processed category. So this would be your soda, your breakfast cereals, your protein bars, your packaged snack items, your protein shake, things like that. So the NOVA system has been widely used, and its uses are broadening. So between 2015 and 2019, the NOVA system was used in 95% of research regarding processed foods. It's also starting to inform policy. So there are some Latin American countries that are using it to form their dietary guidelines. And France has a dietary objective to reduce ultra-processed food consumption by 20%. So as I mentioned, since the system is used so often and regularly, you would think that there would be more research into the NOVA system itself about its functionality and its reliability, but there are actually only very few studies done on it. So I'm going to be talking about 2 studies. The first one is ultra-processed foods, how functional is the NOVA system? So in this study, there are over 150 food and nutritional professionals. They were asked to take a survey. In this survey, it was described to them what the NOVA system was, and they're asked to categorize food items. So there are 2 lists, the marketed and the generic food list. The marketed food item list had food items from the grocery store, just those ready-to-make industrial foods, and the generic food on the generic food item list had food items from food frequency questionnaires from a previous survey. So the list that had marketed items, they were also given an ingredients list for them to refer to. So at the end of the study, they found that 80% of marketed foods and 45.3% of generic foods were all placed in Group 4, and that most of the same food items were placed in completely different categories. In fact, only 3 marketed and 1 generic food item was placed in the same group by all evaluators. So that's only 4 out of 231 items. Most evaluators relied on personal knowledge perception, even though they were given that ingredients list to work off of. And they also found that many foods in group 4 varied in nutrient profiles. The second study I'd like to draw your attention to is called Reliability and Validity of Assigning Ultra-Processed Food Categories to 24-Hour Dietary Recall Data. So in this study, they took 10 dietetic interns, 1 medical student, and 1 nurse. They were all given a course about the NOVA system and were all required to pass a quiz, showing that they understood and were able to categorize food items. They were then paired up and then given a food frequency questionnaire to categorize the food items, but they were supposed to do it independently. They're allowed to use any of the resources that they had during the course, and a third evaluator was used to review and adjust any discrepancies between the pairs. So at the end of the study, they found that this method of double checking and was more reliable due to 88.3% of overall ingredient, and they thought that using this method could limit miscategorization bias, but it also would bring into question other studies that just use a single person categorization.
I don't know if this is, okay, whatever. So for this section, I'll just be honing in on ultra-processed foods. So the production and consumption of ultra-processed foods has risen in the past couple 20, 30 years. This is due to convenience, reach, and availability. That we've now seen them become a kind of trademark and of most people's diets. They typically these days make up a majority of an individual's diets, and that ranges from people, different countries of different economic status, low, middle, and high. And we've seen in multiple studies that where in food deserts and where food is scarce and grocery stores are harder to come by, ultra-processed foods are usually consumed more than whole foods. So this is just sorry, my last slide didn't have half the information on it. Okay, so it was supposed to talk about the global food system. So this is just I wanted to include this diagram just to show all the stakeholders and impact that the food system has on everything that we eat from all different countries. And ultra-processed foods has really opened the door to kind of the globalization of our diets. So instead of, focusing on cultural foods and amongst different countries and how it used to be, a lot of these processed foods are making their way into all different countries. And so our diets are becoming a lot more similar all over the world in that regard. So sorry, half the stuff is gone. Okay. So ultra-processed foods and indicators of health. So one study in particular found that ultra-processed foods had a lower adherence to healthy eating and healthy lifestyles. So this could be seen with the, I'm sorry, I'm so thrown right now. And our overall nutrient intake with ultra-processed foods, one study in particular just found that the majority of their diet was coming from ultra-processed foods, and this in turn, they've found that these diets weren't the most nutritionally adept diets. And so these HEI scores in these study revealed the low quality diets among those participants and populations eating high intakes of ultra-processed foods. So briefly on ultra-processed food consumption and obesity, how this kind of came to view. I won't go into this just because it's a very broad topic and my information is missing, but it really started with ultra-processed flour in the 60s, and we started kind of seeing ultra-processed in the mainstream. People started seeing in the grocery stores, looking at it, doing research into it. And some of these key hallmarks of the studies done back in the 60s and 70s kind of outlined how ultra-processed foods are usually highly palatable. They have higher calories, and then kind of linking some of those disease states such as obesity and colon cancer. And it's not a cause, but it's often poor health and food insecurity are then associated with obesity and chronic disease. Okay, so this is one question that is too large to go into for the purposes of today's presentation. But we wanted to look at plant-based meats alternatives and if they are healthier than their counterparts. And there was a few studies. This study I highlighted here evaluated the nutritional profiles available in Spanish supermarkets. And they found that despite that these items were being marketed as healthier in the packaging and on the shelves, they were ultra-processed foods. And today we aren't relating as the NOVA system explains, it doesn't account for the nutritional content of the foods, only the processing. But I think that's interesting because I think people see healthier and they think just less processing in general, but that's not the case. And they found that the primary protein sources in these items were wheat and soy, just compared to their animal-based counterparts. And they really highlighted the salt content, which I think people are pretty mindful of when it comes to ultra-processed foods. And this was no different when it comes to plant-based meat alternatives. So basically their conclusion was, yes, these items are good for you in your diet. They're a good source of protein, fiber. But like anything else, there's not enough research to show that they are better than animal proteins. And like anything else, they just recommend to eat these moderately and throughout a normal diet. So a question with ultra-processed foods and the processing system as a whole is this a sustainable practice? This is a really large topic to go into, but basically two of the kind of hallmarks are looking into environmental factors, things that are driving that, our healthcare systems, policies, disease states, how those all come in hand. And one study in particular just kind of highlighted how in order to distinguish if this is a sustainable practice moving forward, to see what we already have in place in terms of policies and guidelines for consumers and diet patterns.
All right, so we've talked about NOVA and how it's primarily classifies based on processing and not on levels of processing, numbers, ingredients, and not necessarily what the nutrient content is. And so research has shown, and some experts have expressed concerns with NOVA. Basically all the data that they have from studying epidemiological studies, small studies, but they haven't been able to prove any causation. So everything that's getting put out there for us to take as consumers of the information is talking about associations and not causation. And again, the NOVA's main challenge as of whether or not how we're using it to identify foods and whether they're good for you or not is simply based on what we do to it and the level of processing and not necessarily the ingredients that are involved in it. So with NOVA, some of the foods that are touted as healthy and beneficial would be like whole wheat bread, yogurt. Some of those foods would not be, if you are banning highly processed or ultra processed foods, those foods would not be available. And there are functional foods that are created for a variety of reasons. Some of them, like one of them, are margarines that have plant sterols added to them, which have shown to be very efficient in reducing cholesterol levels in people. Those foods would not be available if they were banned under the NOVA system. And artificial sweeteners, which are used by diabetics and people that are looking for some glucose control, those foods wouldn't be available then as well. There's more concerns that there's conflicting research. Again, the lack of association between ultra processed foods. This study was done, Lu Wang and the research team found that there was a lack of association of ultra processed foods and colorectal cancer risk. And in fact, they found a correlation between consumption of yogurt and dairy desserts in women that was a negative correlation. So as you ate more of these quote highly processed foods, the risk for colorectal cancer in women was decreasing. The next study, that I looked at, there was many variables that are affecting the consumption of these foods besides just processing. Items, such as taste. This one was focused on texture, and they found that, whether it was a healthy food, if it was, the softer texture was consumed to a greater extent than the harder texture. And the same held true for unhealthy foods. Softer texture was consumed at a higher rate than the harder texture. And again, some more foods that would be not allowed under the ultra processed system. Cereals, dark whole grain breads, fruit-based products. But these, while they would be, banned under, if we were looking at banning ultra processed foods, there was, they have been associated with lower risks of type 2 diabetes. And then some additional continuing concerns. The NOVA system does not address overall diet quality. It doesn't address what's in the foods. So the study by Griffin found that after adjusting for diet quality, basically the nutrients that are in the food, there was no longer a positive correlation between ultra processed food intake and cardiometabolic risk, which is what they were studying. Other societal issues that are concerning about banning ultra processed foods and the use of the NOVA system is that it doesn't take into effect cost of these items. These items are large, mass produced. They are cheaper, which could be good or bad. But if you're a low income population, you need cheap foods. You're trying to eat. The thing is trying to eat healthy foods. It doesn't address food insecurity. Shelf life. Some of these ultra processed foods have a longer shelf life, which is important for a variety of different individuals. It doesn't address the issues of sanitation and foodborne illnesses that can take place with when you're cooking from scratch or whole foods, depending on your level of sanitation where you're living. The time that is involved with cooking from scratch now, and everybody's busier lives. And it also doesn't address the issue, this came up a couple of times, of workplace equity, especially involving the poor or the working class constituents. They found that if you have to cook from scratch, most of the poor or working class families, the person that had to stay home to cook from scratch and fix the meals was women. So it's discriminatory in that you're pulling women out of the workplace, and you're not, it decreases the diversity of the workplace as well. So there are, those are social issues that haven't been addressed by NOVA. So we have a little quiz. Some of you that have been sat through this before will know, but based on what you know about NOVA, whether foods are ultra processed or minimally processed, or we just want to know what you think if these foods here are good for you or bad for you based on the ingredient levels. This first one, would you say yes or no for this as a healthy food? Or first of all, is it ultra processed? Yeah, let's say agree it's ultra. So next, is it healthy or is it unhealthy?
Raise your hand if you think it's unhealthy. Raise your hand if you think it's healthy.
So Enfamil, which is a baby formula, which is really critical in some states and in some, depending on the mother and the child. The next one, 3 ingredients, probably available in your shelf in your pantry at home. So is it ultra processed? It's people saying no, some people saying yes. Is it healthy or not? No. 3 ingredients. Everybody has it at home. You could probably make Fritos if you were so inclined at home, because all you need is ground corn, vegetable oil, and salt. But I don't know, many people would say that some people would say it's ultra processed, but based on the ingredients, it's not. And then some people would argue whether it's healthy or not. How about this one? Cultured milk, salt, enzymes, and annatto. Is it ultra processed? Minimally processed? And is it healthy or not? Cheddar cheese, so, you know. And this one, ultra processed, I think we would all agree upon. Healthy or no? No? What, you said definitely not. What makes it not healthy? Yes, so it's ultra processed, and I don't think we would agree that it's a healthy food. And this, I think this is the last one. Ultra processed, probably so. Healthy or no, or no? Colin, you're saying yes, so, yeah. So it's really hard to say based on level of processing and based on ingredients, you know, if something's got more than 5 ingredients, or if something's got ingredients that aren't in your kitchen cabinet, to label it as unhealthy. And a couple of these would be good examples, you know, Kate Farms or the Infamil. Some things that have 1 or 2 ingredients, you may have, doesn't necessarily mean they're healthy, like lard. I mean, it's got 1 ingredient, it's just clarified pork fat, but I don't know that it's necessarily healthy. It's just one of those things you gotta think. So one of the challenges with ultra processed foods is the effect of media and the effect on media. Media always, they're looking for views and viewership. So these stories are popular when you read some headlines about ultra processed foods. And so it's driving a lot of stories that are in the news and a lot of clickbait on the internet. And it's creating a negative public perception of processing foods. And the public may not necessarily know why when they see headlines like the addiction to ultra processed foods, and it continues with something that's, you know, alarming, or trying to quit ultra processed foods is like trying to quit smoking. And then there's public opinion is beginning to drive policy and not science. As Sarah alluded to, in Brazil and South American countries, they're using just level of processing and the Nova scale to basically design or say what foods should be labeled as healthy or should be available or not. And it's happening to some degree in the United States in some communities. And it's low-hanging fruit for the politicians because people are, you know, they're worked up about it and it's important to them and they have strong opinions, and politicians, especially at the local levels, can say, look, well, this is important to you and this is what we've done. But it may not necessarily be the right basis for making that decision. And maybe we should like pump the brakes and slow down, because we've been wrong as a profession and as a country before. You know, we had the whole fat is bad, which led to the fat-free revolution and everybody eating SnackWells and high sugar food with little fiber because fat was demonized and bad. We also have dietary cholesterol increases cardiovascular disease, and that was preached forever. You know, in the 50s, egg consumption was 3 eggs per day. And then after this came out, it dropped to 2 eggs per week per person, which was a huge decrease. And now that all of a sudden dietary cholesterol isn't a huge risk factor in cardiovascular disease. So now the recommendation is that you can have 1 egg a day to be safe. So, you know, we haven't necessarily been right with the science in the past. And this system of classifying is based not on nutrient content, or on science, but based on just purely ingredients and association. So some possible options, there's selective taxation. So foods like the sweetened sugar beverage tax, which some cities have implemented to slow people down on foods that are identified as hazardous to your health. The government can incentivize reformulation of products. WIC just went through this. They were looking at making all of their cereals required to be whole grain. And if they did that, because WIC is such a large purchaser of these goods, industry would basically have to reformulate their products, which would make it healthier for the community at large. And then there's been some interesting research in Europe with improved front of package labeling. So the label that you see there is a Nutri-Score label, and it is based solely on nutrient content of the food, not how it's processed or anything. And the food's graded A, B, C, D, and E. And they've done some research where if they place this label on the front of the package, and they also put a level of processing on there, people have been able to make correct, objective decisions about the food they're taking. So this could be a possible option that regulatory wise, we could go forward with in front of package labeling and providing people with objective information instead of having them sift through all the ingredients on the back of the package. So some final thoughts, just remember the NOVA classifies foods based pretty much on what's done to them, how many ingredients and what they do to them. And it does not look at the nutrient or calorie density of the foods. Research is inconclusive regarding processing and healthfulness. In general, it's just continue to get nutrition from healthy foods, whether that's fruits, vegetables, nutrient dense foods, and minimize the calorie dense foods. And practice moderation on the foods that you consume. So no one's saying not to eat one of those foods, but just keep it in moderation. And here's our post survey.
Question. So it seems like overall dietary advice that we've been telling people fruits and vegetables are good for you for years, and people know that. Would you, because I know you say with some tweaks, these are ways it could go properly, or use a scale to say this correctly. Would you say that's an option worth pursuing, since we've kind of preached forever, eat your fruits and vegetables, whole grains, and the dietary patterns seem to not have shifted very well? Would you say maybe this is something people should invest time in making a scale, because it's probably a lot easier for someone to grab something that's on a scale or a grading system, like you said, versus sifting through it? Or should we say maybe no, it's not worth it, at least at this time point?
I think that there's a lot of evidence in Europe and Germany and England and France and other countries in the European Union that the front of package labeling has allowed people to kind of sift through all the clutter. So it's not saying not to consume fruits and vegetables and fresh fruits and whole foods, but on foods that are processed, whether they be frozen or canned or processed a great deal, if those labels are on the front, people are able to kind of sort through the noise and make a little bit better choice. And if doesn't preclude people from like getting their Twinkies if they want, but they're aware of it when they get it, that, maybe they don't have to, they know how to work it into their diet if they're given the information. So I think accurate and objective front of package labeling, and that the Nutri-Score label it's science-based. There's a way to calculate the nutrients, calories, fat, carbohydrates, sodium. There's a lot of calculations that go into assigning each food a score. So it's an objective. It's not which lobbyist pays the government the most to get their food to say it's healthy. So it's objective, and I think it allows people to make smart, balanced decisions.
Last time someone brought up using having apps to score each food item, and this allows everyone just to plainly see what that score would be. You don't need to use your phone or pull an app out in order to view that and have that information. Yeah.
I'm curious, in the countries that had the scoring system, I know you mentioned there were some like front of label scoring systems. Were there any like behavioral studies done on people in grocery stores? Like, do they choose it if it's a red or if like it's a 4, whatever the scoring was? Were there any studies that collected information on people actually in action in a grocery store if they choose to buy it or not?
I'm remembering the study one of the studies, they did blind shopping. And so they looked at what people selected and chose. And they also were talking some discussion as to why they chose those items. So I guess they looked at behavior to some degree as to why. And these labels have been around, I guess, for a while. So because they added in the additional component of if this you have this label, and then you add in the component with the level of processing. So there were 2 different components on the front of package labels, and people, how they measured it, were able to make objective scores based on what they wanted out of their food. So ultimately, I mean, it's not the only answer, but I think it's part of, we still preach what's healthy, but we're giving people the ability to, pick out what's good or not and what they want and where that falls on the spectrum for them.
I didn't run into any research.
Did you guys run into anything like the countries that have done this, like cost, like, oh, it's gonna cost us this much more to change our label? Did you run into any of that, or was that an issue, or didn't see it?
I didn't see it. I mean, from my understanding, it's mandated to be on the front of all labels of all foods, whether it's a raw food. So it can be printed on there. It can be, when they go through the labels production in the front of the package, like they're making the box of cornflakes or frosted flakes, it's just incorporated as part of the design on the front of the package.
Any noise within the US as far as incorporating that label system on some of our foods?
I haven't seen anything as far as,
It just got introduced to the Senate or House or something. A
Oh.
bill for that last March.
Oh, it is?
Yeah, so it's only been introduced though, so no other steps.
I don't know if have you seen anything with this research as far as like the addition of the added sugars to the back of the label? Like, has that shown any benefit, or is it too early, or did you run into any of that?
I haven't seen anything as far as like reading the nutrition label or the effectiveness of the updated labeling.
Guess mine are just two comments more than anything. Love the quiz about Fritos. A lot of my friends are vegan. And it's actually a vegan snack item for them, which a lot of people also don't realize. And then I love that it's 3 ingredients, but still maybe deemed unhealthy. So just that whole notion of processed versus processed. Just love that was in there. And then second, I guess this is a question. As things change, we've gotten the science wrong before, fat-free, all those examples that you gave. What's the public opinion right now on like the food pyramid being put out? Because that's been changed in my lifetime a few times. Just thoughts on the current food pyramid?
I didn't come across anything specifically in this for the food pyramid, but I do, over the last year, a couple of years, there's a lot of increased skepticism about science in general in the United States. Part of it is because of poor, corrupted research, and that sometimes it's done for a purpose, and but so there's more and more skepticism of just believing research. So I don't know how that would feed into the food pyramid. There are a lot of questions, and I know just from working in different clinical settings, a lot of people still don't know much about what they should or shouldn't be eating or how much of things. So.
It's moved to the plate now. Now it's like a healthy eating plate.
Right.
Yeah.
Any more questions?